Just recently, we have seen missile strikes in Nigeria. The president has named an envoy to actually negotiate Greenland becoming part of the United States. And when Donald Trump came into office, he made clear that he would be willing to use what he called economic force to actually take Canada as well. And so when you look at the military aggression in Venezuela, Canada has an enormous amount of vast natural resources. And that is what the play is for Donald Trump.
Donald Trump has expanded U.S. military operations across multiple regions this year. Missile strikes in Nigeria, naval pressure in Venezuela, and a renewed push to bring Greenland under American control have all raised the same warning from political analysts. These escalations place a bigger strategic target on Canada. For the first time in decades, Canada is being evaluated in Washington not as a long-standing partner, but as a resource-rich neighbor positioned at the heart of America's geopolitical ambitions. And while that pressure grows, Prime Minister Mark Carney is quietly but decisively repositioning Canada, strengthening its economy, reinforcing its Arctic posture, and preparing for a far more confrontational era in North America. The concern began resurfacing as experts drew parallels between Trump's global military moves and the way his administration approaches countries with desirable strategic assets. The strike in Nigeria was followed by increased U.S. naval activity around Venezuela. Soon after, Washington revived plans to negotiate control over Greenland, an idea many dismissed years ago as political theater, but which now appears to align with a consistent pattern. At the same time, Trump reignited criticism of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement, calling it a raw deal for Americans, and hinting that the U.S. could simply walk away during the scheduled 2026 review. Those comments echo earlier moments in his presidency, when he claimed he would be prepared to use economic force to bring Canada into alignment with U.S. priorities. These developments, taken together, have reshaped the conversation. Canada is not being targeted militarily, but it is increasingly affected by a worldview in Washington that evaluates countries based on leverage rather than partnership. Canada's resource base, industrial capacity, and Arctic access naturally place it inside that calculus.
Trump's global decisions are often treated as isolated events, but they follow a clear undercurrent: the expansion of American influence through military pressure in regions rich in resources or positioned along future trade routes. The renewed interest in Greenland removes any doubt about that trend. It signals that the administration sees Arctic dominance as a strategic necessity. Once that lens is applied, Canada's position becomes unavoidable. Few countries hold more critical minerals, clean energy potential, or Arctic territory than Canada. That combination makes the country valuable and vulnerable at a time when the U.S. president is willing to use power expansively. This is why analysts now argue that each escalation abroad widens the pressure on Canada. Not because Washington intends direct conflict, but because its strategic worldview no longer treats Canada as an equal pillar of North American stability, but as an asset whose cooperation should be compelled.
The trade relationship tells the same story. Trump's threat to abandon the 2026 USMCA review is framed as economic correction, yet the underlying objective is unmistakable: weaken Canada's negotiating position. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, lumber, and autos were never about repairing imbalances. They were about disorienting Canada before the next round of bargaining. This approach plays well in U.S. domestic politics, where Trump presents himself as the defender of American workers against foreign competitors, sometimes even when those competitors are allies whose industries are deeply interlinked with the U.S. economy. But the economic reality is more complicated. Supply chains between Canada and the U.S. are fused. Pressure on one inevitably harms the other. Trump is willing to accept that cost if it strengthens his leverage. Canada has learned this lesson clearly. In Trump's worldview, economic relationships are transactional, and trade agreements are tools rather than commitments.
Carney's response has been to redesign Canada's economic and geopolitical footing so that the country cannot be cornered by U.S. leverage again. Over the past year, his government has deepened ties with Asian and European economies, accelerated clean energy megaprojects to attract global investment, and advanced critical mineral development at a pace rarely seen in Canadian policy. Each initiative pushes Canada toward a more autonomous position in global supply chains. Carney also recognizes that sovereignty is multidimensional. A country that controls mineral inputs, low-carbon power, and Arctic infrastructure becomes indispensable to its partners. That indispensability becomes protection. A Canada that supplies the world with the ingredients of next-generation industries is far more secure than a Canada that relies overwhelmingly on a single export market. Public sentiment increasingly supports this direction. Canadians have become more cautious toward the United States under Trump and more supportive of diversification as a national strategy rather than a partisan preference. Carney's policies align with that shift, giving his government both political space and national legitimacy to strengthen Canada's position globally.
The Arctic ties every piece of this narrative together. As polar routes open and global shipping patterns begin to shift, the region is evolving into one of the most important geopolitical arenas of the century. Whoever shapes Arctic governance, security, and infrastructure shapes the future of North American and global trade. Trump's fixation on Greenland demonstrates that Washington understands this, but Canada's Arctic position is far stronger, both geographically and diplomatically. Carney's investments in icebreakers, northern surveillance, new defense cooperation with Indo-Pacific partners, and expanded Arctic infrastructure show that Canada is no longer treating the North as a distant horizon. It is preparing for competition. When analysts warn that Trump's military moves abroad enlarge the target on Canada, they are pointing directly to the Arctic. The region is becoming a center of global power, and Canada sits at the core of it. That reality alone elevates the stakes of U.S.-Canada relations beyond trade disputes or political friction. Taken together, these developments reveal a Canada undergoing a structural transformation. The country is redefining how it sees its place in the world and how it responds to American pressure. Carney's strategy is not reactive. It is a deliberate repositioning designed to give Canada the leverage it lacked during earlier confrontations with the U.S. Whether through new supply chains, defense modernization, or diplomatic expansion, the message is consistent. Canada will not allow its future to be determined by any single foreign power, friendly or otherwise. This approach marks a sharp contrast with past decades and reflects a new Canadian confidence shaped by global instability and strategic necessity. Trump's military escalation abroad and his assertive posture toward North American trade signal a fundamental shift in how the United States views its neighbors. Canada, with its resources and Arctic position, is inevitably drawn into that shift. But the country is not standing still. Through economic diversification, strategic investment, and Arctic readiness, Carney is building a Canada designed to withstand pressure, project influence, and control its own trajectory. The central question now is not whether Canada is being targeted, but whether it is becoming strong enough that the target no longer matters. Every sign suggests the country is moving decisively toward that outcome.
Ground has officially been broken on Volkswagen's PowerCo electric vehicle battery gigafactory in St. Thomas.
This is the world's largest automaker. They don't do a plan for just this year while Donald Trump's got tariffs. They're doing a plan looking forward.
Canada just scored a win that cuts through all the noise of the North American trade war. While Donald Trump doubles down on tariffs, emergency orders, and political theatrics, the world's largest automaker quietly made its choice, and it wasn't the United States. Volkswagen broke ground on its PowerCo EV battery gigafactory in St. Thomas, Ontario, the largest facility of its kind in Canadian history. And in a moment that should make Washington pause, A local official said the part no one in the U.S. wants to admit. This is the world's largest automaker. They don't make a plan for just this year while Donald Trump's got tariffs. They're making a plan looking forward. That single sentence captures the entire story tonight. Canada is the long-term bet. Trump's America is the short-term gamble.
The milestone kicks off development of 3 major buildings at the site, making it the largest facility of its kind in the country, with full production expected to begin in 2027. The facility is set to create up to 3,000 direct jobs, while protecting Ontario's auto manufacturing supply chain amidst the trade war.
Volkswagen's PowerCo has officially moved into full construction, marking the start of a multi-year industrial transformation for southwestern Ontario. The St. Thomas site is now home to 3 major buildings rising out of the ground, with full EV battery production set for 2027. The project promises around 3,000 direct jobs and thousands more across suppliers and the regional economy. For a community long tied to the ups and downs of the auto sector, this investment feels like a turning point, not just for employment, but for identity. Mayor Joe Preston described the factory as generational change that would allow families to stay, work, buy homes, and build a vibrant future without being forced to leave in search of opportunity. Yet the celebration comes with a message aimed well beyond Ontario. Volkswagen chose Canada at a moment when the United States is entering its most unpredictable trade cycle in years. Trump's new tariff regime has introduced a level of uncertainty that multinational companies simply cannot build billion-dollar strategies around. In contrast, Canada is executing a long-term industrial plan with clarity, consistency, and political alignment. And the timing is crucial. As global automakers race to secure stable access to batteries and minerals, any country offering predictability becomes a magnet for investment. Canada stepped into that role decisively. The groundwork now being poured in St. Thomas signals not only the rise of a factory, but the emergence of a national manufacturing strategy finally aligned with global demand. Companies do not fear high taxes or strict regulations as much as they fear unpredictability. And that unpredictability now defines U.S. trade policy under Donald Trump. His administration has imposed sweeping tariffs under IEEPA and Section 232, triggering retaliatory threats, court challenges, and mounting frustration for manufacturers. Reuters and Bloomberg both describe Trump's tariff landscape as one of the biggest business risks in North America today. Volkswagen saw all of this and walked the other way. It did not want a political gamble. It wanted a predictable, rules-based environment, and it found that in Canada. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada is presenting itself as a country that plans for decades, not for election cycles. Ottawa is building full EV supply chains from minerals to manufacturing, offering long-term investment credits, securing international partnerships, and pushing to double non-U.S. exports within 10 years. Volkswagen doesn't choose sites based on short-term headlines. It chooses based on energy stability, predictable climate policy, critical mineral access, and workforce reliability. Canada met every requirement. The United States, under Trump's tariff-driven strategy, did not. The calculation was simple. Canada is the safer investment, Canada is the smarter investment, and Canada is the forward-looking investment. Trump's goal was to force manufacturing back onto U.S. soil, but the outcome has been the opposite. By destabilizing cross-border supply chains and raising import costs unpredictably, Trump made the U.S. a riskier place to build long-term industrial projects. Volkswagen responded exactly how a global automaker would. It chose the country with stability, critical minerals, clean electricity, and a government capable of delivering consistent industrial policy. Even the messaging from Ontario officials reinforced this reality.
Volkswagen is planning beyond Trump, meaning the company sees the U.S. as too erratic to anchor a generational project. Canada, meanwhile, offers continuity regardless of political turbulence. This is why analysts describe Canada's EV build-out as one of the most strategically coherent industrial pivots in the Western Hemisphere. While the United States spends political energy on tariff battles, Canada is quietly constructing a continent-wide supply chain, stretching from mining towns to battery campuses to export-ready auto plants. The Volkswagen deal is not an outlier. It is a preview of where the industry is moving next. This decision also fits into a broader shift across the world. The U.S. is facing a surge of corporate lawsuits over Trump's emergency tariffs. Mexico has warned of reassessing its own manufacturing strategy. Europe is preparing retaliatory measures if U.S. tariff escalations continue. China's rare earth leverage remains a looming pressure point despite the temporary truce negotiated at APEC 2025. Canada, however, is moving in the opposite direction, building stability, broadening trade ties in Asia, and offering companies like Volkswagen a future insulated from Washington's political storms. The St. Thomas Gigafactory is not an isolated win. It is the industrial expression of a country repositioning itself for a more multipolar economic world. For Canada, this project is a declaration of industrial confidence. It signals that the country can win global-scale factories, build complete EV ecosystems, and compete directly with the United States. It strengthens local economies, secures high-quality employment, and anchors Canada firmly in the clean technology manufacturing race. More importantly, it proves something Canadians often forget. When the world looks for reliability, it looks north. For the U.S., the implications are significant. Tariff chaos does not attract investment. Consistency does. Volkswagen's choice demonstrates that Trump's protectionist strategy is not reshoring industry, it is pushing it away. The U.S. had every structural advantage: larger markets, larger workforces, aggressive incentive programs, and political pressure on automakers to stay domestic. Yet when Volkswagen had to place a once-in-a-generation investment, it chose Canada. It should not be a mystery why. Companies can manage competition, they cannot manage chaos. The groundbreaking in St. Thomas is more than a milestone for Canada's EV future. It is a moment of clarity for North America. Volkswagen made its choice, and in doing so, revealed the deeper truth shaping global industry. The future belongs to the country that can think beyond the next press conference. Canada is offering stability, clean energy, long-term planning, and a government aligned behind a coherent industrial strategy. Trump's America is offering unpredictability, tariff shockwaves, and policies that shift faster than companies can build factories. Volkswagen saw the difference. The world sees it too. And if more companies follow the same logic, Canada will not just keep pace, it will lead.
Steel, aluminum, also the auto sector, of course, being hard hit by President Trump's.
The reality is the pressure is today, if General Motors volume is down 25%, if Nissan volumes are down 25%, and you're not getting those orders, you need working capital. And, you know, the Prime Minister said, I'm going to focus on procurement from Canada. But if we've got solutions for other NATO partners, you know, there's 29 countries that if we've got something, we can sell to the Danes, we can sell to the Germans, we can sell to the French. We are really looking at this as what's the opportunity to pivot and how hard can we go?
Canada just delivered one of its clearest messages yet. Donald Trump's unraveling auto sector will not drag this country down with it. As U.S. automakers stumble through production cuts, tariff chaos, and political uncertainty, Canada is taking a very different path, a deliberate pivot designed to protect our jobs, our supply chains, and our national independence. This is not just strategy. This is self-defense. The turning point came from a remarkably candid interview with Flavio Volpe on CTV News
the head of Canada's Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association and a key advisor to Prime Minister Mark Carney, Volpe did not sugarcoat the situation. He explained that the U.S. auto sector is weakening under Trump's second-term protectionist agenda, with major companies reporting significant declines in volume. General Motors is down by roughly a quarter. Nissan is down by a similar margin. When those numbers collapse, Canadian suppliers immediately feel the pain. Fewer orders, lower volumes, and rising pressure. But what stood out was not just the problem, it was the response. Volpe revealed that Canadian auto firms are already looking for opportunities to pivot, the same way they did during the pandemic when production lines were rapidly converted to manufacture ventilators, PPE, and essential medical devices. This time, the pivot is aimed at reducing dependence on a U.S. partner that has become unpredictable. Volpe also highlighted a major shift inside the federal government. He quoted Carney directly, "I'm going to focus on procurement from Canada." That sentence marks an unmistakable shift in industrial policy. Canada is no longer willing to rely on American-made equipment, especially when the U.S. government is weaponizing trade policy against its closest ally. The interview came at a moment when Trump's tariff regime has destabilized cross-border supply chains. Courts are preparing to hear challenges to his latest trade actions, and automakers are reconsidering investments across North America. In the middle of it all, Canada is reassessing its place in the continental auto ecosystem and charting a course with far more control. Donald Trump entered his second term promising to restore American manufacturing dominance. Instead, his policies are weakening the very industries he claimed to protect. Expanded Section 232 tariffs have raised cost for U.S. producers. Supply chains had become more fragile, not less. Export markets are shrinking because of retaliation. Investment decisions have stalled or been suspended. Reuters reporting throughout 2025 shows U.S. automakers delaying new EV lines, revising production targets, and warning shareholders about rising uncertainty. Politico went even further, calling one of Trump's tariff rounds a self-inflicted blow to Detroit. When you combine political volatility with financial strain, the U.S. auto sector becomes a risk, not a partner, for any country tied too closely to it. This is precisely why Volpe's message hits so hard. If Canada stays attached to a sinking system, we sink too, and Canada is not willing to do that.
Canada's pivot is not improvised. It is a coordinated industrial shift accelerated by the lessons of the pandemic. When supply chains broke, Canadian manufacturers proved they could transform overnight. That muscle memory is back. Auto suppliers are now exploring roles in defense technology, aerospace tooling, battery components, robotics, and high-precision engineering. Instead of waiting for U.S. orders that may never return, they are preparing to compete in markets where reliability and innovation matter more than political theatrics. This pivot is reinforced by federal policy. Carney's budget frameworks emphasize clean power infrastructure, domestic supply chain resilience, critical minerals, and advanced manufacturing. The message is that Canada will build the conditions for automakers to thrive here regardless of U.S. turmoil. Ottawa is also revising procurement rules, so taxpayer dollars support Canadian production instead of subsidizing an unstable American system. The end goal is unmistakable: a Canadian auto ecosystem strong enough to stand on its own, trade globally, and withstand whatever Washington throws our way.
One of the most powerful ideas in the interview is that Canada should stop purchasing American-made equipment when domestic capabilities exist. For decades, it felt natural to buy from the United States, but Trump's escalation of tariffs changed the equation. A partner who uses economic pressure as a political weapon cannot expect loyalty in procurement. Volpe made the point clearly. If Canada increases defense spending and industrial investment, we must ensure those dollars strengthen Canadian factories, not feed a U.S. system that has treated Canada as collateral damage in its trade battles. This is not anti-American sentiment, it is a pragmatic response to a new reality. Washington has become too unreliable, too impulsive, and too willing to use Canada as leverage.
The safest long-term strategy is simple: build more at home.
Perhaps the most underreported part of the interview was Volpe's comment about NATO. He pointed out that Canadian manufacturers are preparing to compete for contracts across 29 NATO countries. In other words, Trump's protectionism has unintentionally opened the door for Canada to become a more important supplier to Europe. If allies see the United States as unstable, they will look for partners who can deliver consistency. Canada fits that role perfectly. We have regulatory stability, world-class engineering, abundant critical minerals, and a political climate that values international cooperation. If Canadian suppliers can pivot into high-value defense and industrial manufacturing, they could gain access to a market far larger than the U.S. auto sector ever offered. This is the deeper story. Canada is not shrinking its ambitions, we're expanding them.
The final point is blunt but necessary. Canada cannot stake its industrial future on an America that keeps shifting the rules. The traditional North American auto partnership was built on trust, predictability, and shared economic interests. Under Trump, those pillars no longer exist. If the U.S. auto industry continues to wobble under rising costs and volatile policy, Canada will be dragged into every downturn. Remaining dependent would mean accepting that our suppliers, workers, and communities live at the mercy of decisions made in Washington. That is not a sustainable model for a country with Canada's capabilities. The pivot is not optional, it is survival.
Canada is no longer trying to convince the United States to stabilize. We are preparing for the possibility that it won't. Trump's erratic trade agenda has weakened America's auto industry and exposed the risks of overdependence. Instead of waiting for the next tariff threat or supply chain shock, Canada is charting a new course, one that emphasizes domestic production, global diversification, NATO partnerships, and strategic independence. The United States may be entering a turbulent decade in manufacturing. Canada refuses to be dragged into that turbulence. The pivot has already begun. The only question now is how far Canada is prepared to go and how quickly we intend to finish the job.